And so as Lisa mentioned, I'm a PhD candidate here at Bond. I'm also a research scholar with the Queensland Academy of Sport, and my project is actually funded by the Queensland Government. And before I start, I'd like just to thank the Centre for Commercial Law and the Faculty of Law and Bond Business School for this opportunity today. It's a great opportunity for me at what is a relatively early stage of my research project. I'm just a few months into it, really. I'm doing it part-time at the moment. I started in September, so very much in its infancy. And unlike a lot of the presentations today, I'm kind of looking forward rather than looking back on what I've discovered. First of all, I just thought I'd refer to my title because when I put that title together, I kind of hummed and hawed with the use of the word hero, because by right it really should have been heroine. But in the context of my study, which focuses on female refugees, the word hero is in many ways a much more powerful word than heroine, in that it speaks to a champion and it speaks to a role model. And for me, there's no reason why someone like Cathy Freeman can't be a role model and a hero to me as much as, say, Jonathan Thurston. So in that respect, that was what kind of guided me to stay with zero, and it also just gets the mind thinking about the concepts and the vagaries that are at work with this research project. The word zero I didn't put in there too lightly either, but when you consider where a lot of people have come from when they end up in a country where they're resettling, it's a word that's not a million miles away from reality. You're thinking about people that have lost homes, lost jobs, often lost family, have lost neighbourhoods, their health has failed them or fallen away on them, and they hit what might be regarded as pretty much rock bottom. And so that zero to hero thing is not it can really, in many ways, capture a part of the theme of my research. That figure there, 22.5 million refugees worldwide, it pops up in a few places, and it's one that I find kind of numbing when you think about it. 22.5 million refugees around the world. The figure above it, even more numbing in many ways, 65.6 million people right now worldwide that have just been displaced from their homes, just their lives uprooted and just flung into turmoil and flung into uncertainty. That figure there is the most recent figure for the number of refugees that have settled in Australia. That was for the 2016-2017 year. That, in fact, is the highest number ever for a financial year here in Australia, going back to the inception of the programs for humanitarian migration in Australia. It goes back to the mid-70s. The previous high was during the Fraser government. That's the current, that's shown, that in many ways it shows how it's growing like that. That's also, that high is on the back of the special visas that have been granted to people from Syria and Iraq over a 3-year program that's been ongoing for the last 3 years, which ended as of June last year. So those figures kind of are put out there just to give a sort of a global and a local context about where the situation is at and how the issue of integration into Australian society is a growing one. It's a real one here in Australia, and one that needs constant attention, not least because it's something that's very much in flux. It's something that cannot be kept in the one place at the one for the whole time. Even the Iraq and Syrian refugees that have come here, their numbers are now, their curve is that way, whereas the African numbers have fallen off a little bit, and in terms of the European numbers, they've kind of gone that way a little bit post the Yugoslav breakup and that. So it's never a set picture, and so in many ways no one solution fits the whole lot. On my page here I had, when this comes up, take a pause, so I'll take a pause. So to my research question, how does participation in sport affect the integration experience for refugee women in Australia? It's a multidimensional project. I feel very honoured to have this opportunity to do it, and I applaud the Queensland Government and the Queensland Academy of Sport for undertaking the project, and I'm very honoured to have been selected to do it. Today, I'm just going to focus on one part because it's the part that's in my head at the moment, and that's where my lit review is at the moment, is in the space of integration. And like whenever I talk about this, I feel a bit silly bringing up me coming here, but it's no harm. Like I moved here 11 years ago, an Irish man moving to Australia, and it's not easy, but relative to others, it's pretty easy. And if only for that fact alone, it's no harm just me saying it out loud and others considering where they've come from. Because there is an integration process. I remember sitting in Fortitude Valley a couple of days after we arrived into Brisbane with my partner, having coffee in the morning, reading the Courier Mail, thinking, this is the life, isn't it? And coach said, we need a house and you need to find a job fast. And that was it. The holiday in Australia, the new life in Australia suddenly took on a new reality. We have to get a house, we have to get some way of making money to actually pay the rent for the house. And it took a while, like it was 6 weeks later before I got my job, and I had to move out of Brisbane up to Hervey Bay. Again, in the context of my research, that was easy. You know, that was expected, that was not too stressful, it had its little stresses, but you know, my integration experience, not too bad. So integration is obviously something a lot deeper than that. And I'm now delving into the concepts and the theories and the frameworks that are out there in this space, trying to kind of, I suppose, cajole them into a concept or a framework that'll work for the purposes of my research. And the work of John Berry has, it's a good starting point for me. So I've just pulled out a few grabs from his work. There's one or two that I wanted to draw attention to, the degree of cultural integrity that is maintained. So when he talks about integration and the degree of cultural integrity that is maintained, he's talking about that ability to maintain your identity, your traditions, while you step into this new world. So that's a step away from assimilation. That's different to acculturation. And that, I suppose, nails down a little bit about the how important it is to get the idea of integration right for the longer purposes of this study. Also in that, and because I'm focusing on refugee women, you've got to think about the traditional obligations that come with a lot of the cultures that are now among the refugee groups that come here. And with the encouragement to maintain cultural integrity comes the acknowledgement that in some cases those traditional obligations don't encourage involvement in sport, don't encourage social interaction outside of the ethnic community. In fact, work the other way, because in some cultures the females are the people that run the house, and they're also that safety aspect, that about being, just knowing that everybody is safe given everything that they've come through. Further down, I just wanted to also draw the attention to the one at the bottom there, adapting national institutions. So the dominant group or the host community must be prepared to adapt national institutions to meet the needs of all groups. And I know others touched on that idea of adapting needs to meet the needs of groups. I think, I'm sorry, Yvette, is it? Yes, you touched on it today with your presentation about disability and about coaching groups having to adapt their structures to meet the needs of different people coming into the groups. And as my research goes forward, that will be a major focus of it, looking at the communities in Australia, the sporting communities, the sporting organisations, the sporting clubs, and which are well equipped, which are flexible enough, versatile enough to actually adapt and to meet the needs, and which are most appropriate to do that given the, for want of a better phrase, the target market of this, the focus of this research, which is female refugees who may not necessarily be interested in, let's say, football, let's say AFL, they may be, but it may just be other things like swimming, might be recreational activities. So pinpointing the organisations and the communities, sports communities, that are probably best positioned to lend a hand here, to make a difference here, will be part of the exercise for me. Zipping along, obviously integration I've touched on how fluid it is, and how just you cannot tie integration down in any one place at any one time, and that's reflected in other parts of the literature, where you look at resettlement, how traumatic it is, the instances of racism and discrimination, how they affect people's mentalities as they try and just find a place in a new country and find just a little bit of stability in a new life. And to come up against this kind of uncertainty can obviously impact probably more harshly on people that have already been through remarkably traumatic experiences, and who are particularly vulnerable, and who really don't want any more uncertainty. And perhaps because of that desire not to want any more uncertainty, are probably a little bit reticent about stepping out into a sporting world that they don't know too much about. Amidst all the, I suppose, like the fluidity and the non-static nature of the integration world, the work of Agar and Strang does give us the 4 indicators by which we can actually, maybe examine what integration comes down to for most people. And I mentioned earlier, but for me, that it was a house and a job when I got here. And in their research with refugee groups, they have found that employment, health, education and housing are the areas that are the focus of most refugee groups, with varying priorities when they end up in a place where they're looking to resettle. And I left that quote in there from before: sometimes other priorities have to take precedence. These are the priorities, so where does sport fit into that? And that's, for me, a key question about sport. In a lot of lives, it's fun, it's entertainment, it's social, it's where we get away from it all. It's where we go to just, let our hair down and just switch off. But if your priorities in life are just putting a roof over your head, getting some kind of job, a little bit of income, finding a school that your children can fit in at and not have to worry about, if these are your priorities in life, where does sport fit in? And can it fit in? And perhaps, again, one solution doesn't fit all, so perhaps sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes sport isn't the solution, and sometimes sport isn't right for somebody given their priorities in life. So again, this research will be quite challenging in pinpointing the channels and the moments and the right directions to take at the right time in what is very much, to my mind, very complex kind of world and a complex situation. But in answer to my own question, I do believe sport has a role to play and can play. And I'll just run through a couple of examples that have leaped out at me thus far at this preliminary stage. And one very, very primary example of how refugees are challenged when they come to a country. If you've come to a country where there's non-English speaking and you have to get a bus into the city, get a bus for a job interview, and you don't even know how to work out the bus system. That whole simple thing of knowing the language, having the confidence to get on a bus and ask a Brisbane bus driver, but how do I get to? Sometimes you might be just inclined to stay at home. Just leave it. I'll look after the children today. So an initiative, Aqua English is an initiative that came to my attention late last year, which is a group of refugee women and some of their children who learn to not just to swim, but just to be comfortable in water. But part of the deal is they learn to actually speak more English through that experience, and they learn the language of the water. And for me, sport has that capability of just everybody can speak the same language, even if nobody is speaking the same language. People connect, and people share words, and they share expressions. And it's a wonderful arena for that kind of interaction. And so again, there's a way, to my mind, where a really important skill, speaking the language, a skill of integration, can be nurtured along in a routine and safe environment. In terms of housing, I just lifted this line about a refugee Sudanese group down south, down in Melbourne, I think it is, a new emerging community with little social capital to draw upon to access suitable and affordable housing. So they talked about that absence of social capital or very little social capital that they can get their hands on or that they can get access to in their lives. And again, I would look at sport as potentially an avenue to social capital. That social capital is the networks that can lead to conversations, that lead to information that you won't find on a website, that you won't find on a poster board at a community centre, but that you'll get when you're talking to somebody, and when somebody kind of just says, oh, I know someone just down here, have a chat with him, have a chat with her. And I think that sport, that social environment has a lot to offer in that respect. And again, I'm just really scraping the surface of the whole social capital area there, but that's just by way of my example for today. And the third of those indicators, health. It's a pretty obvious one, but I'm just going to highlight, for me, one of the emerging themes of the literature around refugees settling in Australia is actually a sense of isolation, and where that leads to depression, stress, and in some very obviously sad situations, to suicide. And mental health, I think, is now front and center in discussions in life, happily, today, unlike, say, 10 years ago. And we all talk about it and we open up about it. But we need to look out for the mental health of those that don't have voices. And I think, again, sport has that capacity to, through exercise, build resilience, build people's sense of health, and not just physically but mentally, and feel good about themselves, feel confident about themselves, and as our most recent presenters, to feel empowered about them, to feel able to go down and get on that bus and go on and push on. Little steps that we all take for granted. The things that we just wake up in the morning and do without thinking, others have to toss and turn and go, oh, can I do this today? So there are three examples for me of where sport can actually provide the link from integration through to from the people to integration, really. And I think that's the avenue. These are some of the avenues I hope to explore in the times ahead. Looking at, I broke it down when I originally put my proposal together about how what kind of groups I'd look at in terms of the refugee women, and I was prompted to break it down this way by my own involvement. I volunteer with the Multicultural Development Association, and as such, I actually played a bit of football with a group of refugee men for a little while, and we took part in the Global Games, a competition that they hold here in Brisbane each year. And it was mainly Afghan men and a couple of guys from Sri Lanka and one or two from Africa. And we made up a really good team, even though we only had 9 out of 11 players on the morning of the game. But at the end of the game, we actually won as well, which is crazy, the first game. That's a whole other story. But having played with them on a Wednesday afternoon for a bit of fun and a bit of interaction, this was different. We were in a competition, we wanted to win, and we won. And the new bond that I experienced with these guys was phenomenally different to the bond I had 3 days earlier. So I wanted to include, and it's the third one there, a competitive element to my focus. And so I want to look at, first of all, I'll start at the top, I should, recreational sports that are not incorporating a competitive element. And I think Jane touched on that today when you're just talking about the triathlon and where the celebration of power and the celebration of winning and moving away from that a little bit. And I think that's got to be a key focus in this examination. Sports teams that are made up of members of one ethnic group, but who compete in a organised competition. I'm curious about that, and there is one there. That's the team from Bhutan in northern Queensland who do that. And I'm really curious and interested to see just what their experiences of integration have been over the last few years, because they're quite established there now. And then the third one was my interest in players, women that get to join a team, a women's team, an established team like the Tarragini Tigers, my team, and how their interaction and their experience of integration formulates through that. because of the routine that they have, and because of the new bonds that they have, and because of the bridging capital that exists there compared with the bonding capital that exists with the Bhutanese team. So I just bring it back finally to my research question: how does participation in sport affect the integration experience for refugee women? That's the question that lies ahead for me. I look forward to getting some of the answers, but one will never get all of the answers. Thank you.